right, we're live. Hello, friends. Welcome to the 2016 Global Dialogue on Waste. This is the fourth year of the Global Dialogue on Waste, and we're very proud of that. We recently heard from World Bank employees that they're organizing viewing sessions for our panels. And if you guys are actually viewing it now, shout out to Shilpa and Lisa at the World Bank for doing this. We organized a panel along with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and the International Solid Waste Association recently on food waste. And professionals working in international development and climate change are a significant part of our audience, and our panels provide them perspective on many issues and experience from different parts of the world. And we welcome all of you to join our discussions with your comments or questions using the live chat window on the website, which is www.wastewise.be, or by tweeting to us using the hashtag #WasteDialogue. And coming to today's panel, we'll be talking about lifestyles, consumption, and waste management and climate change. And just to introduce the subject, our planet is changing very quickly due to various driving forces, but population growth and consumption rate underlie all other present drivers for global change. And we'll be talking about consumption today and how it is linked to lifestyles, what influences lifestyles, and all of that impact on climate change. And to discuss these, we have Professor Carl Zimring from Pratt Institute and Alisa Shargorodsky, who is a zero waste consultant. And I'll let them tell more about their work. But Professor, could you go first?
Thank you, Ramjus. Yes, I'm an environmental historian and professor of sustainability studies at the Pratt Institute in New York, which is a design and art school. So a number of my students are creating both goods and services that relate to our discussion. I come at this from a historical perspective. I have a book out about 200 years of the history of scrap recycling in the United States called Cash for Your Trash. I discuss a lot of the cultural and social dimensions of waste, including who handles waste and what are some of the implications of waste management for various communities. Related to that, I have a book out from New York University Press called Clean and White, A History of Environmental Racism in the United States. And I'm the co-editor of the Encyclopedia of Consumption and Waste, The Social Science of Garbage, which is a 1,200-page interdisciplinary approach to all manner of things related to these topics.
Great, thank you, and welcome. And Alisa?
My name is Alisa Shargorodsky. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Alisa Shargorodsky, and I am based in Philadelphia. I'm a zero waste consultant, and I work with a variety of community organizations and businesses to help them evaluate their waste stream and assist them in cutting down on their solid waste that's coming out of their establishment. I also, as far as community organizations go, I look at cities, specifically mostly commercial corridors, and help the corridors kind of evaluate what's going on spatially, so that if they're interested in taking a more conservative approach towards their resource output and they're trying to do some source reduction, I help them to figure out the possibilities there.
Great, thank you. And today we just wanted to, given that we'll be talking a lot about culture, we wanted to start with a rather difficult question, which is, does providing solutions or providing services for waste management, does that encourage consumption? For example, I've heard it time and again where people say that because you have landfills, or because you have incinerators, or because you have recycling technologies, therefore people are encouraged to consume more and put more out because they know that all of this will be taken care of by someone at some point. So that's a question. I mean, and I wanted to ask Carl on what kind of angles can we look at this question and how do we approach the question?
Sure. Well, one aspect that may be useful is thinking about the issue of waste as a relationship between stakeholders, in that there are producers of goods and services, there are consumers, and there may be public agencies that mediate between them. And one of the things in industrial society we've done a very good job of the last half century is having public polities develop ways of reducing the visible burdens of waste on consumers, and also taking a lot of the burdens from private corporations that make waste. So, yeah.
There is a lot of background noise. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that might be traffic outside my window, possibly.
It sounds like static, like there's a static sound.
Yeah.
I can't hear it at all, so I don't know.
It's not happening.
It's gone.
Now.
Yeah, it's gone.
Sorry about that. I'm sorry, I lost my place where our discussion was.
So we were talking about waste as a relationship between different stakeholders.
Yes, and so one of the major aspects of the last half century is that cities, sometimes partnering with private corporations such as Waste Management, have done a very good job of reducing the burdens for both consumers and producers. But as we were talking a little bit offline before that, this has led to a lot of expense for polities to continue with these services. For example, in New York City, trucks leave the city with garbage every single day to go hundreds of miles into Pennsylvania and Virginia to go to landfills. So a larger and larger aspect of budgets are going to managing waste. So one of the issues with that is as New York City, or as cities continue to grow, does that then simply lead to more and more use of single-use disposable packaging that can easily be taken out of the stream, out of sight, and out of mind? And our waste management services in the city are very, very good, so a lot of my neighbors will dispose of enough goods to fill up their garbage can twice a week because they know it can be removed. I often have my students at the beginning of the semester do personal waste audits where they simply take notes, do a diary every day on every single thing they dispose of, and they're often shocked by how easy it is to dispose of materials, be it food, be it packaging, in a large urban society. Conversely, my in-laws live in a very rural community where they have to drive into town with their own discards in order for them to be managed, and they do very little shopping as a result of that. So there are ways in which our convenient systems of waste management may be encouraging greater disposal.
So it should be made more difficult?
Well, the tricky thing with making it more difficult is, will that lead to less consumption or greater visibility of our waste in especially our streets? And in large urban areas, we have a distinctive history of streets being used as sinks for waste that could lead to dangers for playing children, for transportation, that simply living like people who live in a 300-person town may not be a solution for our large urbanized societies. But
right.
So rather than saying, no, we should make it more difficult, maybe what I'm saying is we should have the real cost of waste management be more transparent to all three stakeholders, not simply the polities, not simply the taxpayers, but also putting some of that burden on the producers of our packaging, of our foodstuffs, etc., so that we may have more economic incentive not to consume as much.
Right. Alisa, did you have something to say?
Yeah, this kind of made me think about a festival that happened in Philadelphia where we took, instead of taking all the trash and putting it in a black bag and hiding it somewhere, we actually built a giant glass corral, and we collected all of the trash from the festival and we put it inside as a type of installation. And people's reactions it was completely amazing to see. People were like, "Why are you showing us this? This is our trash. This is disgusting." And then there were some kids that were like, "Oh my gosh, we can't do this. This is so much trash." And they were really putting two and two together. So, you know what? what Carl is saying, I think, it really makes a huge point, is that when somebody doesn't see the outcome of their behavior, their extended behavior over a long period of time, it's hard for them to formulate, like visually understand, unless they really look at photographs of landfills, or it's hard for them to really think clearly about what it is that we're doing collectively. So I do think that that leads to increased consumption.
Right. Actually, as the first topic for the 2016 Global Dialogue on Waste, we discussed something called outer space and deep oceans, because these are some of the farthest places that humans can get to, and our waste has already gotten there. And it's just that idea of away, somewhere else, away. So we did explore that topic, but this also reminds me of a challenge called Trash on Your Back, which is
Yes.
organized by Diana Dean in California. And what the challenge is, you take a 7-day challenge, a weekly challenge, where you have different themes from a school or from an organization. You form different teams, and then each team is given the task of carrying a bag with them. And in the bag, they put every trash item that they generate, like everything that they could, they would otherwise dispose. And by the end of 1 week, I guess, you look at everything, and then the lightweight, there are lightweight champions and different kinds of, prizes or awards for people who generate the least trash. And I think that 1 week is also a journey for them, where they understand what they're disposing, what they can avoid disposing, and what are the things that they're buying which have to be disposed and cannot, that really helps them.
I have student group at Pratt and elsewhere at Knightburg have adopted that challenge themselves, and as you were saying, it really gets into the issue of what is individual choice and agency for consumption, and how is our lifestyle dependent on the context of where we live and what systems we depend upon for our everyday uses. And it's very illuminating to make all of this visible through personal behavior.
Right. So as a conclusion to this question then, so we can say that there is a degree to which the ease of being able to dispose kind of does increase consumption. But then again, you cannot actually stop providing those services, because that's what is currently happening in the developing world, and they have a lot of different types of problems that they're dealing with without such provisions or technologies.
And also,
right.
to add to that very quickly, but particularly in places like Africa, where I work with somebody who collects tires that are just short dumped. They don't necessarily have a very efficient way of collecting tires. So what they're finding is that their tires that are being short dumped are becoming breeding grounds for malaria. So in this situation, you see how a waste material then does result in disease. Mm-hmm. So this is a serious thing to think about.
It is, and today we're actually just talking about waste, consumption, and climate change. But then just climate change is just one aspect of the different impacts that waste has on the environment. Great point. And so, as a segue into a different question, we were talking about Trash on Your Back, which is a citizen-led, activism kind of initiative. And Alisa and I were talking about Plastic Pollution Coalition. They were the curators for our previous theme, and how they do a lot of good activism and then awareness about issues, so that you could actually create and coordinate change, by doing that from the small scale. And Alisa, do you have anything to say about that? The need.
Well, I feel that there are in every town. Well, we talked briefly about the benefit of social media in this situation, that somebody took a picture of Whole Foods putting peeled oranges into a plastic container, and before you knew it, the conversation included several thousands of people, and these messages were heeded by Whole Foods, and they stopped doing it. So I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but
that's a good example.
yeah, I think this is one form of social activism that the interwebs have really expanded for us.
Right, right. Carl?
This actually relates a little bit to the segue between the first topic and the last one. In the city of Chicago, for the last 25 years, there's been an ordinance on the books requiring large buildings with dwellings of more than 6 units to contract privately for recycling services, but that ordinance was never enforced. So by making things more difficult for urban society, we just had more material going into landfills than being recycled. In the last couple of years, a few 20-somethings have developed an app called My Building Doesn't Recycle, where you could simply report on this very simple map the location and the type of building you have and how many people live there. And because this map has gotten hundreds of people to contribute, this past spring, the city of Chicago has announced ways in which it will attempt to actually enforce that ordinance, because the public embarrassment of My Building Doesn't Recycle has led to action where there hadn't been for 25 years.
Oh, that's amazing. Alisa?
Yeah, I didn't know about that, but that's a big problem in Philadelphia as well. And I get so many phone calls from random people who, you know, get my phone number and they say, is there something you can do? I've reported this to the city. They're not taking appropriate action. And also it's mandated in the city of Philadelphia for every commercial entity to recycle. And a study that I had done last year showed that there was only out of the 400 food service establishments that I audited, there was only 63%, or there were 63% of establishments that did not offer recycling to their customers. So that's more than half. And they'll say things like, oh, well, we recycle, it's just in the back. So, you know, and there's only so much transparency there. So that's a problem. And lots of buildings not recycling. So multifamily dwellings, a really problematic thing. But I love this app. Is it only Chicago-centric?
Well, this particular application is Chicago-centric, but it's such an elegant design that it could easily be imported. So looking for that in the App Store for either Apple or, and I cannot remember what the other phone services are, you can see it and then contact the developers and say, would you like to do a Philadelphia version?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And so let's maybe we could move to another question. But sorry, I'm blanking out. I was actually thinking about a question, but I'm blanking out right now. But oh yeah. So what factors influence lifestyles, and how certain decisions which are taken elsewhere influence the lifestyles of people, consumers, but also people in restaurants or commercial businesses, So talking about that, Alisa, did you want to talk about how companies, certain design decisions that companies take does affect, how we consume materials?
Yeah, I could talk about that. Specifically, well, if you're thinking about like grocery stores, for example, and we look at like the cooperative model. A lot of these co-ops, and even not only co-ops, but Whole Foods, they offer to some extent some bulk food, and that could impact how we're consuming goods. But this is just very limited, right? Because you have a bulk section, and then you have rows upon rows of packaged items where you don't have an option. So this does boil down to a design issue, the way that we're designing grocery stores, the way that everything is so packaged for the purpose of branding, I believe. But everything is just laid out for us so that we cannot just purchase the good. We have to purchase this box with a plastic bag inside. And so I think it is a design problem that I hope that we get away from in the future.
Carl?
I have a couple of comments on that. One is, one of the issues with packaging is we don't simply associate with branding, but also with safety, that this is a closed seal so that no one can tamper with our food. So we've had it marketed to us for over half a century that a sealed disposable package leads to safe food, safe drinks, safe drugs, such as Tylenol, which was, in 1982, someone tampered with Tylenol packaging, put cyanide in, killed many people. That led to much more packaging in a lot of the goods in our storefronts. But related to that is it's possible to have packaging that's not single-use disposable, and there's been a very concerted effort since the 1950s, particularly with beverages, but with all sorts of food providers, on putting out single-use disposable bags, boxes, bottles, and cans, and then pushing the burden of disposing on that on the consumer and, again, on cities. And so our norm now that we live with if we go to the supermarket is you buy Coca-Cola, you buy it in one large 2-liter plastic bottle or maybe a 6-pack of aluminum cans, and then Coca-Cola's relationship with that packaging is gone. It's ours to deal with. And so having this type of single-use design from companies has led to a tremendous problem for consumers and for the waste management companies that have to deal with the problem.
Right. Alisa?
Yeah, I very much agree with you, and there is a legitimacy behind thinking about food safety. And whenever you do research and you're looking at packaging, if you're looking in, say, Google Scholar, and you're looking at you say food safety packaging, this is always the thing that comes up. It's always about, we're not talking about the overarching extent of our refuse. We're talking about in the immediate moment, is our food going to be safe if we do less packaging? And that's why I think it is very much boils down to a design issue, because I think that it is possible for us to redesign the way that we receive our food so that we can maintain its safety. But still, I think that there will be some responsibility on the consumer, just like it is for people who do shop at food co-ops who bring their own containers. They've made that decision that they want to cut down on their waste impact, so that they purposefully make sure that they bring everything they need so that at the end of the day they have a limited amount of waste. But if we're talking about the general public who is used to just going to the grocery store, it becomes kind of a vicious cycle where most grocers and in most places in the United States don't have access to this type of distribution.
Right, right. And Carl, what you mentioned about sealed and unsealed packaging, and the kind of secure feeling it provides to consumers. I was actually shopping yesterday for toilet paper, and we found a large, a large roll, a large package, and my wife saw that part of the package was slightly broken, and then she was not comfortable with that. And it was toilet paper. It was not Tylenol, or it wasn't food. So that I do understand what you're saying, about the sense of security that you get, with a sealed package. But also talking about something else, which is, in a market situation, when we say that the companies take decisions. I mean. One of the very early panels that we organized, in that Beth Terry, who's a plastics living less with plastics activist. She's a plastic pollution activist, and she said that you could actually use your money as a vote in in a market economy, where you could actually use your money to support certain products that you like, because of different aspects. One of them could be packaging. So when you're talking about the companies provide all these different choices, and then most of the choices are packaged. So where do you think the change starts? I mean, does it start with the public, or starts from the companies? And how do we deal with that question?
I suppose one term we should put into this discussion is extended producer responsibility. And who has the burden of implementing that? There are a number of discussions of voluntary applications of that throughout industry, but as we've also seen, especially in the EU with some attempts in the United States, EPR becoming public policy, mandating that the burden of the design decisions of a company may rest with the company, means that I think this is something that very much should be debated in city legislatures, state legislatures, and in federal governments. And we've seen a lot of this happen specifically with single-use packaging already, and over the last 5 years, either fees or bans on single-use bags have been spreading in American cities, and the state of California had an extremely illuminating debate over this, in which the Plastics Council brought up this notion of health, that if you bring a reusable bag to a market, you could be spreading germs, and so that there's an individual personal health risk of doing that. That led to an initial unsuccessful campaign for banning or putting taxes on single-use bags in California that was eventually overridden. So this notion of personal safety versus the waste stream has been a big part of the rhetoric on why this is a responsible design decision, and only an educated population that can rebut that will lead to, I think, successful outcomes in pushing extended producer responsibility further.
Yeah, that also happened in Seattle. I spoke with a woman, her name is Heather Trim, and I also met with Tim Kroll last summer, excuse me, and Heather Trim, she was one of the primary leaders in the ban on plastic bags, and what she said was that the American Chemistry Council came in and they were paying signers $9 per signature. They were paying $9 per signature to see that the ban on plastic bags did not go through. So, they have a huge lobby, so they have a lot of power to really stop a lot of these progresses. And even some cities now are putting a ban on a ban.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. What's that about? I haven't heard anything like that.
Well, actually, New York City is part of this. The city council put a ban on single-use bags that the state legislature just overrode because of this lobbying. And the rhetoric that was used for this wasn't simply personal safety, but economic equity, that this would burden small businesses and people living in poor neighborhoods greater than it would people who are wealthier. And so that was the justification the state legislature used to override the city's ban.
Right. We actually asked the same question to a panel last week on economic instruments to reduce consumption and packaging. And then they were of the opinion that it does not actually impact low-income communities a lot, because the amount of packaging that they buy is different, as opposed to what they had to say is that it depends upon the product, right? If it's plastic bags, then it does not really affect them. But then if it's a different product, then there could be impacts. But then those different products are generally, bought by a different income level, economic level. So they were of opinion it really depends upon the product, and it's not a blanket statement that we can make there.
And that's consistent with research going back over a century about who's disposing what and what this means for household budgets in an industrialized world where we're consuming things that other people are making, that it's not the people at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum who are really having not only burdened by it, but also are producing the problems. That's not the case. Martin Melosi has a wonderful book called The Sanitary City that looks at the history of our waste management systems, mostly in the United States, which delves into this question a fair bit about what socioeconomic dimensions there are of disposal. And again, going back to 1912, there are surveys that it's not really the burden on the lower classes, it's a burden on the producers that they're shifting.
Mm-hmm. Alisa, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, really what this boils down to for me is that our behavior becomes a quality of life issue, for a lot of inner city neighborhoods that don't get appropriate attention. So speaking from the perspective of Philadelphia, something that we noticed, there's actually a man in the city of Philadelphia. His name is Kelly O'Day. He worked for the water department for many years. And he has a blog, but he talks a lot about this, about that the trash becomes a quality of life issue, because in very wealthy neighborhoods, those neighborhoods are receiving street cleanings, more trash cans, proper services to keep their streets looking clean. In areas where, you know, we have this whole like a broken window theory happening, and the disinvestment into neighborhoods, in those neighborhoods you see just an unbelievable amount of plastic bags and trees and trash sprawn around the streets. And even, I'm surprised, in New York, even you see that in New York too, that it's just in every city you go to. What does this say to people? What is the greater meaning to people, and especially people who are already in an economically disadvantaged neighborhood? What it says is that this city doesn't care about you. This is not our problem. This is your problem, and you'll have to deal with it. Especially those neighborhoods are subject to short dumping, things like this. So that's something that Philadelphia has been trying to tackle for a really long time, but the result is really not fruitful.
Mm-hmm. Carl, I see you want to say something, but before that, guess what the national bird of Kenya is?
What?
It's a black plastic bag, because it's in all trees everywhere. So, all right, go ahead, Carl.
Well, what this relates to is that waste is a justice issue, that what we decide to discard as a society is culturally constructed, and if we value the idea of disposable plastic bags, that's really a decision we're making to shunt off the waste dimensions of that on more vulnerable people, as well as fish, birds, and other wildlife. And so the moral aspects that have been really attached to recycling since the late 1960s are about a deep concern with the consequences of our waste that we've yet to grapple with as industrialized people, and pushing this notion that this has unequal burdens on people, I think, is crucial.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So, to the question on where the change could start, I think we could conclude that we need educated citizens for some of this change to start, so that you could vote with your money for different products. Is that safe to say?
I think I have a bias that that's absolutely true. Not only education for consumers, but the reason I teach at Pratt is I'm teaching the future designers of our waste stream about the implications of their work. And in the design community, be it architecture, industrial design, packaging design, there are notions of principles of good design strategies. And one of the ones that's been around for over half a century is design is environmentally friendly. Well, what do we mean by that? Environmentally friendly in what context? Are we reducing the carbon footprint of our goods? Are we reducing the toxicity of it? Who has to deal with the environmental aspects of the design of a bag, a box, a smartphone, what have you? And getting the design community to really focus on what the implications of their designs are is a crucial aspect of this. And making this as transparent and public as possible, I think, is also very important.
Lisa?
Yeah, yes, this kind of cradle-to-cradle concept is becoming more and more critical as we're reaching, the outskirts of our current market model and design. But something that I find, I get a lot of pushback from the environmental community on this topic is that because I work with food service establishments, and because for many years I actually used to assist in the distribution of like PLA plastic and bagasse, until I started to really think a little bit more critically about this. So this is kind of these ideas of producing an eco-friendly container. I grapple with this topic a lot because as much as I believe it's better to use something that is a renewable resource, I also think about like corn. Like, where does this polylactic acid come from, and what did we have to do to get it? We had to raise a whole bunch of monocrops.
With petroleum.
Right, yeah. Right. I mean, what's right? This is tough though. Like, we use petroleum to raise corn, right? And we also, I'm pretty sure in the process, do a fair amount of spraying that then results in soil degradation and water usage. And so and then just to make another product that then is a single-use product that costs a lot for the company. They want to switch over to something more green. They buy this thing. And then the result is a PLA cup that you can compost, but then we don't have any industrial composting systems to handle these things. So this is like a larger infrastructure problem and I think that's something that the government could do. They could really do us a service by making sure every city has an industrial composting system. This could be huge for us.
Yeah, I think from here, just talk about consumption. I mean, the reason we're organizing a panel on consumption is just because of the upstream impacts that it has on, the environment. But I think from the point that you made, we could go in so many different directions, but we have less than 10 minutes to go.
You're breaking up a tiny bit.
Okay. Is it any better now?
No.
Better now?
No.
No?
Mm-mm.
All right, let me just give it a moment. I don't want to change the microphone again. Any better now?
No.
Oh, wow. Sorry, guys, for the delay. Any better now?
No, although if you speak slowly, I could probably respond to a question. But it would have to be slowly.
Great. So from the point that Alisa mentioned, we could take so many different angles. But in the last 10, we have less than 10 minutes, and I wanted to talk about the sharing economy. Alisa, do you want to start our call? One of you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Something that was really fascinating to me, and I know that this is also slated to possibly happen in New York, and maybe, Professor, you could speak to this. I don't know if you know anything about it, but the cup circulation systems, I read something the other day that said that New York, there's some kind of program that's happening here in New York where they're doing like a coffee cup drive, and that they're trying to have like coffee cups in areas so people can have access to reusable coffee cups. And this is something that last year I met with Laura Weiss. She's the creator of GoBox Portland. And what they do is they created a system where downtown in their, I think it's their financial district, what they do is they have this one area that's just full of food trucks. And if you wanted to become a member of this service called GoBox, you would pay into this process, and you would get a card. And when you go to any of the food vendors, you could give them the card, and they give you food in a reusable box. You would take this box to your office or your home, and you would eat the food, and then you would be responsible for bringing it back and dropping it off into a container that collects all of them. They pick them up every day on bicycles, sanitize them, and bring them back to the food trucks. And I think to date there was like, I want to say there's like more than 90,000 containers that have been preserved. So I love this kind of a system, even though a lot of arguments for like life cycle analysis would say that this isn't more efficient because you have to use a lot of water to clean it. I can't conceptualize how making a styrofoam container, using it one time and then putting it to the waste stream is more ecological than reusing a container over and over again. So.
And the LCAs really depend on what metric you use of how many times the cup may be reused before it's disposed of. We have a Center for Sustainable Design Strategies here at Pratt that has looked at this very question. And even using the fairly conservative metric of a porcelain cup or ceramic cup being used 100 times, that if you take the water consumption into account, you're still way ahead over a single-use styrofoam cup. So the question with LCAs is, what metrics do you use? Using fairly reasonable ones, I think this is a very useful thing to do. One of the nice things about the sharing economy is the amount of data we have has just gotten greater about waste. And one of the subjects that I give to my students in design is, what's the most environmentally responsible automobile design of the 21st century? And students will go, oh, the Toyota Prius, because it's a hybrid and extends the gas mileage. And I said, yeah, that's definitely uses less fuel than a Hummer. So other people will say the Chevy Volt, because that would be essentially 100 miles per gallon of gas for an all-electric car. And we start to look at life cycle analyses of, again, cradle to grave of automobiles, and we've discovered that there's a more efficient design for energy, let alone materials, and that's Zipcar, which is the ride-sharing service, so that you're essentially making 3 automobiles for 100 people rather than 100 automobiles for 100 people. And that the use of such cars, whether they're Priuses, Chevy Volts, or even a Hummer, comes out to far less energy being used than if we have single goods for each individual consumer. And being in large metropolitan communities makes this easier to do, but also having internet applications and data and making it fairly easy for consumers to see the possibilities has been a real change since I graduated from college in the 20th century.
Right, and the public transit system also makes it extremely easy. The public transit system also makes it extremely easy.
Yes.
In places like New York. But again, well, let's not get into that discussion. But coming to the sharing economy, I think culturally that has been one of the major impacts on our lives, on how comfortable we feel using zip cars or sharing tools, or these days also using pre-owned items. So do you guys have anything to talk about that?
Well, we discussed a little bit yesterday the notion of design for disassembly relating to this, that, for example, shoes tend to get worn out and you throw the entire shoe away, and there's not really a market for used shoes because people find less comfort with shoes that have been pre-worn. But developing shoes that you can replace the sole or replace the top and extend the life of them could lead to changes in this way. And so that's one aspect of the sharing economy that relates to what designers are doing to think about how the products can be taken apart or modified or otherwise adapted by consumers is a big question.
Like Chaco's, they do that. The company, Chaco's, the shoe company.
Yes.
Yeah, where you can get it restrapped or get your shoes repaired. You send it back to the company.
Mm-hmm.
So if more companies did that, like JanSport, I think they still do that, where your bag breaks and you could send it back to them. You could use the same bag for your entire life.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of where we get into the idea of like designed obsolescence, where if companies can still make money, but I'm actually really fascinated with this. Like, how can we get more companies on board to do this?
And this relates to, historically, this was more the norm 150 years ago, that we had a stewardship of objects, as the historian Susan Strasser talks about, where when we bought clothing, we'd mend it, we'd maintain it, we'd extend the life of it, mostly because we didn't have cheap, reusable, fast fashion. And it made economic sense for households to do this. We can do this again, but it does require clear design choices in education in order for it to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So great. So we're probably over time, maybe 1 minute over time. But if you have any concluding remarks, really quickly, and we can start with Carl and then Alisa.
Okay. What I really like about our discussion is we've talked about economics and culture together because you really can't separate them. I have one open thing to think about, which is the notion of 3D printers and produce on demand is a fascinating topic for research. In one case, it may eliminate a lot of transportation costs, but would this mean the production of more disposable material that could lead to more transportation in the waste stream going forward? I think over the next 5 to 10 years, that's something we should really be looking at.
Great. Alisa?
Yeah, this is a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for creating this platform. I guess to close out, I feel very much inspired to say that everybody, even though it's that we have this amorphous problem, the only way that we're going to get through this is with the buy-in from the public, and that the public needs to start really thinking about this more clearly. Even though the recycling comes and takes away our stuff and the trash comes, like really looking a little bit more deeply and thinking a little bit more critically about this. I think every individual person needs to do their part, because then that's the best way that we're going to shift. If you have a sector of society that cares and another sector of the society that doesn't care or doesn't think about it, it's not in their conscientious mind to think about this, then it's going to be increasingly more problematic. But if we collectively come together to do this, I think we can see amazing things happen. It's a very exciting time.
It is. Actually, our generation probably has one of the largest global problem, climate change, and it's really exciting to see how we'll deal with this. And but yeah, change does start small, but with consistent efforts and collective action, it can be achieved. So to summarize the panel, so thank you very much, Alisa and Carl, for your time. And the next panel, we were talking about LCA and how LCA really depends upon the parameters that you choose. And we are having Professor Marion Chertow from Yale University.
Oh, fabulous!
And Professor Martin Brunner from Vienna Institute of Technology. He's called the father of urban metabolism. So both of them have agreed to be a part of the panel, but we're just trying to find a time which suits both of them for next week. So that's the next panel, tools for managing consumption in cities. And there we'll talk about LCA, we'll talk about urban metabolism, and other such amazing techie topics. All right, so thank you again, and you can follow us at BWasteWise, and you can follow our website for all updates about timings of the future panels, which is www.wastewise.de. So thank you again, and have a good day, good night, and good evening.